Welcome to the Riddle of the Rhodesian Gold Concession, a Sherlock Holmes adventure from the series Shadows of Empire, the unseen cases of Sherlock Holmes, playing in the year 1895. It is a peculiar sensation to find one's confidential reports to the Foreign Office, once sealed under the strictest secrecy, now laid bare. These are the chronicles of those unseen cases, the Shadows of Empire, wherein Mr. Sherlock Holmes and I were drawn into the murky world of imperial politics, confronting secrets that threatened the very foundations of British power across the globe. The first of these delicate matters to be released from the archives is the affair I have long called the Riddle of the Rhodesian Gold Concession. I shall now recount the particulars of that grim business. Chapter 1. The November fog, a palpable entity of smoke and river damp, pressed against our window panes at 221B Baker Street. It muffled the familiar clatter of hansoms on the cobbled street below, reducing the city's roar to a distant, mournful murmur. Inside, the cheerful crackle of our hearth offered a bastion of warmth against the gloom. Sherlock Holmes, who had been sunk in one of his profound silences for the better part of the afternoon, suddenly lifted his head, his hawk-like features alert. "A client of some standing approaches, Watson. I should know the sound of a private brougham with a well-shod horse anywhere," replied Sherlock Holmes. Scarcely had he spoken when a sharp pull echoed from the bell downstairs, followed by the sound of Mrs. Hudson's footsteps ascending the stair. A moment later she announced our visitors. The first to enter was a lady whose name was well known to us, Lady Beatrice Foxglove, a woman of formidable influence. Behind her, however, came a younger figure, clad in the deepest mourning and veiled so heavily that her features were entirely obscured. "Lady Beatrice, an unexpected pleasure. Pray do come to the fire. You and your companion must be chilled to the bone." "Thank you, Mr. Holmes. We have come on a matter of the gravest urgency." "Allow me to present Miss Clara Ashworth," answered Lady Beatrice Foxglove. At her name, the veiled lady gave a slight start. With trembling fingers she lifted the black crape, revealing a face pale with grief, but marked by a fierce intelligence in her dark, troubled eyes. She was young, perhaps no more than 23, and possessed a composure maintained at great cost. "Miss Ashworth, I was sorry to read of your father's recent passing. Lord Ashworth was a man of considerable principle. The papers suggest a tragedy born of despair," deduced Sherlock Holmes. His tone was gentle, yet his eyes were sharp, missing nothing of the slight stiffening in our client's posture. "The papers, Mr. Holmes, are mistaken. My father was not a man to despair. He was a fighter," remarked Miss Clara Ashworth. Her low voice, though tinged with sorrow, resonated with compelling conviction. "The official verdict was suicide, was it not?" commented Dr. John Watson. "It was. He was found in his study, a pistol by his hand. The door was locked from the inside. Scotland Yard sees no reason to look further. But I know my father. In the days leading to his death, he was not despairing. He was furious. He was preparing to fight a monumental injustice," responded Miss Clara Ashworth. "And this injustice concerned, I presume, the new Rhodesian Gold Concession?" observed Sherlock Holmes. Miss Ashworth's eyes widened in surprise. "How could you possibly know that?" replied Miss Clara Ashworth. "Your father's opposition was noted in the financial columns. But more than that, the faint traces of red dust on the hem of your morning dress are quite distinctive. It is the soil of the city, not Westminster. You have come not from your home, but from a hurried consultation with your father's solicitors, no doubt to understand the very financial instruments he sought to oppose. You suspect the motive for his death lies within those documents. Sherlock Holmes responded. A faint blush rose on Miss Ashworth's pale cheeks. She nodded, her composure momentarily faltering. He believed the concession was a swindle, a theft of land and resources from Chief Lobengula and his people. He was preparing to expose the men behind it at a board meeting of the British South Africa Company. 3 days before that meeting, he was found dead. Mr. Holmes, I cannot allow his name to be stained by the cowardice of suicide when I believe him to be the victim of a most foul murder. I implore you to take my case, and to do so with the utmost discretion," remarked Miss Clara Ashworth. Holmes leaned forward, his expression now one of intense concentration. The languor had vanished, replaced by the keen, predatory glint that heralded the chase. Rest assured, Miss Ashworth, the truth will be found. The first step must be to examine the scene itself. A silent study often has the most to say. Watson and I shall travel to your father's estate at first light, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The journey to the Oaks, Lord Ashworth's country estate, was a sombre affair. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels on the track beat a funereal rhythm as we sped away from the London fog and into the crisp air of the home counties. Miss Ashworth, a veil drawn across her features, sat opposite us, a silent and stoic figure. Upon our arrival, a heavy oak door creaked open to reveal a house where a profound and unnatural quiet had settled like dust. The very air hung heavy, thick with unspoken grief. Her voice, though strained, was steady. "Inspector Lestrade is in the study. He believes the matter concluded. I pray you can prove him mistaken," Miss Clara Ashworth replied. The familiar, bustling figure of the Scotland Yard inspector met us at the study door. The room itself exuded masculine comfort. Walls of leather-bound books, a heavy mahogany desk, and the faint, lingering scent of cigar smoke. Yet a grim tableau starkly shattered the peace. A stark chalk outline on the Persian rug marked where the unfortunate Lord Ashworth had fallen, a pistol still lying on the desk beside a neatly penned note. He spoke with a confident air, gesturing expansively. "A tragic business, Mr. Holmes, but quite straightforward. Financial ruin, a moment of despair, the note says it all. We need not trouble you further," Inspector Lestrade answered. Holmes offered no reply, his eyes already sweeping the room, darting from corner to corner like a hunting hawk. He moved with a silent, feline grace, ignoring Lestrade entirely. He knelt by the desk, examining the revolver without touching it, his long, thin fingers tracing the air above its polished surface. He then produced his lens and began a minute inspection of the rug near the French windows, which stood slightly ajar, admitting a chill draught that caused the gas lamps to dance. His voice was low and sharp, cutting through the room's stillness. "Watson, your eyes are excellent. Do you see it?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. I followed his pointing finger. A small, almost imperceptible smudge clung to the very edge of the dark crimson rug. It was a partial boot print, caked with a damp, clay-like soil, quite unlike the gravel of the estate's driveway. "Good heavens, Holmes, it appears to be mud," remarked Dr. John Watson. Lestrade scoffed, his boots creaking as he shifted his weight. "A servant, no doubt. The gardener. It means nothing," replied Inspector Lestrade. Holmes rose without a word and drifted towards the grand fireplace, where a few grey ashes lay, the last remnants of a recent fire. He picked up the small brass tongs from the hearth, their metallic scrape against the stone echoing in the silence. With infinite care he sifted through the embers. After a moment he extracted a minuscule object, a blackened, curled fragment of paper no larger than my thumbnail. He held it out on the palm of his hand. "This, however, means everything. Observe the thickness of the paper, Watson, the unmistakable character of a telegram form. And see here, the letters Gula remain legible," explained Sherlock Holmes. I peered at the fragile scrap. He was right. The letters were faint but distinct. His tone became incisive, a lecturer explaining a vital theorem. "A man about to take his own life may write a note, but he does not stop to burn a telegram. This was not burned calmly. It was thrust into the fire amidst a struggle. Lord Ashworth was attempting to destroy this message while another was in this very room with him. A message, I suspect, that mentioned a certain Nenbele chief. The game, my dear Watson, is afoot." Lestrade stared, his mouth agape, while Miss Ashworth drew a sharp, hopeful breath. Holmes turned from the fireplace, his grey eyes burning with a fierce energy. This murder was not born of country despair. Its roots lie in finance and empire. Our next stop is not Scotland Yard, but the heart of the city. We must pay a visit to the offices of the British South Africa Company. The following morning found us rattling eastwards in a hansom cab, the charred fragment of telegram safely tucked away in my companion's pocketbook. The grey London fog had thinned to a watery haze, through which the spires and chimneys of the city emerged like the masts of some great landlocked fleet. The clatter of iron-shod wheels upon the granite setts grew to a ceaseless roar, engulfing us as we plunged into that great beating heart of empire and finance. When a man of Lord Ashworth's stature opposes a venture of colossal financial import, Watson, and is then found dead mere days before a deciding vote, where must we look? "We must look to the venture itself," replied Sherlock Holmes. His voice, sharp and clear, cut through the din of the street. He gestured with his long, thin fingers towards the imposing facades of the banks and trading houses that lined Threadneedle Street. "Here, my dear fellow, more fortunes are won and lost in an hour than in a lifetime elsewhere. The British South Africa Company is the very crucible of this Rhodesian affair," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The offices of the company were as impressive as Holmes had suggested. A commissionaire in a smart uniform held open a heavy mahogany door, and we stepped from the clamour of the street into the sudden, solemn quiet of a hall of polished wood and gleaming brass. The air was still and smelt of floor wax and old paper. Upon one vast wall hung an immense map of Africa, with great swaths of it coloured in the bold red of British dominion. The low murmur of clerks at their high desks was the only sound to disturb the cathedral-like quiet. Upon stating our business, an inquiry into the estate of the late Lord Ashworth, we were shown into a well-appointed inner office. A man rose from behind a large desk to greet us, He was of middle height, impeccably dressed, with a clean-shaven, earnest face, and hair just beginning to grey at the temples. This, we were told, was Mr. Silas Croft, a senior adviser to the company, and a man who had worked closely with the deceased. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, an honour. Please do be seated. The news of Lord Ashworth was a terrible shock to us all. A great man, though perhaps a little resistant to the necessary march of progress," Mr. Silas Croft said. His voice was smooth and reassuring, the tone of a man accustomed to handling delicate matters with diplomatic ease. He gestured to two leather-bound chairs. "The march of progress, Mr. Croft. You refer, I presume, to the new gold concession in Rhodesia," Sherlock Holmes said. "Indeed, a venture of unparalleled promise. Not simply for the investors, you understand, but for the empire, for civilization itself. We are bringing industry, order, and prosperity to a dark and savage land. Lord Ashworth, bless him, saw only the risk. He could not appreciate the grander vision," replied Mr. Silas Croft. Croft's eyes shone with a fervour that seemed entirely genuine. He spoke of profit margins and mineral yields in one breath, and of Britain's solemn duty in the next. To my own ears he sounded utterly convincing. "And this vote? It is of great significance," commented Dr. John Watson. He turned to me with a condescending smile. "My dear doctor, it is everything. Millions are at stake. The very future of our operations in southern Africa hangs in the balance. Lord Ashworth's opposition was the last significant hurdle. His tragic departure has, I must confess, simplified matters considerably." Mr. Silas Croft answered. The admission, though couched in respectable tones, hung in the air. Holmes, who had been studying a geological survey map on the wall, turned his head slowly, his gaze sharp and penetrating. "Simplified matters, a most precise choice of words. Tell me, Mr. Croft, does your work often take you out of the city, to the West End, perhaps?" Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The question seemed to come from nowhere. Croft blinked, momentarily losing his composure. "Rarely, Mr. Holmes. I am a man of finance. My world is bounded by these square miles." "Why do you ask?" replied Mr. Silas Croft. "Idle curiosity, Mr. Croft. We shall not take up more of your valuable time," explained Sherlock Holmes. Outside, once more, the roar of the city engulfed us. I felt bewildered by the interview, by the sheer scale of the ambitions we had just witnessed. As we hailed a cab, I glanced at Holmes. His face was a mask of grim concentration, his eyes fixed not upon the grand buildings around us, but upon the muddy pavement at his feet. "A most edifying conversation, Watson. Mr. Croft paints a fine picture of imperial destiny. But a man's words may be shaped for any occasion. The clay upon his boots, however, tells its own unvarnished truth. Come, Watson, back to Baker Street. We have chemistry to attend to," stated Sherlock Holmes. We returned to Baker Street, leaving the grand edifices of the city behind us. Yet the impression of Mr. Silas Croft, so polished, so assured, lingered in my mind. The contrast could not have been more stark. Our sitting-room, once a haven of quiet contemplation, was now a veritable laboratory. An acrid tang hung in the air, catching at the back of my throat. The familiar hiss of the gas lamps was now joined by a low, insistent bubbling from a retort stand Holmes had erected upon the mantelpiece. My friend had shed his coat for a dreadful mouse-coloured dressing-gown, stained with chemicals and quite unlike his usual sharp attire. He was hunched over his microscope, his entire being focused upon a smear of dried mud on a glass slide, a relic gathered from the late Lord Ashworth's boot. He worked with a fierce, silent intensity that I knew better than to interrupt. "Watson, come here. Your medical eye will appreciate the nuance," explained Sherlock Holmes. His voice was sharp with the thrill of the chase. I moved to his side, peering down the brass barrel of the instrument. To my untrained eye, it was merely a collection of reddish-brown granules, indistinguishable from any other London dirt. "I confess, Holmes, it appears to be nothing more than soil. What can you possibly deduce from such a common thing?" commented Dr. John Watson. "Common? My dear fellow, there is nothing common about it. To the trained observer, the earth beneath our feet is as eloquent as any written testimony. I have made a special study of London soils. I can distinguish the clay of Hampstead from the gravel of the Embankment as easily as you can differentiate between a case of measles and one of scarlet fever." Sherlock Holmes responded. He gestured towards a row of neatly labelled glass jars on a side table. They contained a veritable library of London's geology, from pale chalk to black river mud. He took a pinch of the sample from the slide, dropped it into a test tube, and added a clear liquid. A faint effervescence was the immediate result. Observe the high concentration of ferruginous particles, iron oxide. It is this which gives the soil its distinctive ruddy hue. Now, I have tested samples from the grounds of the Ashworth estate. They are a heavy loam, quite different. The mud from the city streets is black with soot and horse droppings. This, however, this is something else entirely, remarked Sherlock Holmes. His long, nimble fingers moved with purpose, comparing the sample against his collection, holding slides up to the light, and making notes in his ledger. For a long moment the only sound was the scratching of his pen. Then, with a triumphant clap that made me jump, he slammed the book shut. "I have it. The soil is not native to Belgravia nor the city. It comes from a very specific place. 3 months ago, the path alongside the lake in St. James's Park was relaid. The turf and earth were brought in from a cutting in the Surrey Hills. This red, iron-rich earth is unique to that one small stretch of our great metropolis." "St. James's Park," I said, astonished. "Why would Lord Ashworth be meeting someone there, of all places?" asked Dr. John Watson. "Precisely. It is a known venue for clandestine appointments, Watson, away from prying eyes and listening ears. Our victim did not wander there by accident on the day of his death. He went to meet his murderer," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The implication was staggering. A secret meeting, an argument perhaps, leading to a desperate act. My mind immediately turned to the smooth-talking Mr. Croft. "And now," Holmes continued, his eyes gleaming as he began to divest himself of his dressing-gown, "we must observe the spider in his web. It is one thing to hear Mr. Croft speak of finance, but quite another to see him practice his art. Tomorrow I shall become a humble investor, anxious about his colonial shares. The floor of the London Stock Exchange shall be my theatre. Sherlock Holmes pointed out. The man who accompanied me into the city the following morning was a stranger to me. Gone was the sharp, hawk-like profile of Sherlock Holmes, replaced by the stooped shoulders and anxious mien of an elderly country parson who had wandered into the lion's den. With powdered hair, a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles, and a perpetual tremor in his hands, he was the very picture of a man whose modest savings were at the mercy of forces he could not comprehend. It was a masterful transformation, one which allowed us to melt, unnoticed, into the pandemonium of the London Stock Exchange. I have never been in a place of such calculated frenzy. The great hall echoed with a deafening roar, a human tempest of shouts and cries. Men in top hats and frock coats surged around trading posts, their voices a constant barrage. The very air seemed to vibrate with tension, thick with the rustle of paper and the frantic scratching of nibs in ledgers. It was a cacophony that assaulted the senses. Yet Holmes, in his guise as the timid investor, possessed an unnatural calm, his gaze sweeping the floor with a quiet, methodical intensity. Do not watch the crowd, Watson. Watch the eddies. The true currents are directed by the quietest stones in the river, Sherlock Holmes pointed out. My eyes followed his. He was looking towards a pillar where a small group of men were gathered. At their centre, exuding an aura of immense self-possession, stood Mr. Silas Croft. He was not shouting, nor was he gesticulating wildly like his fellows. Indeed, he seemed a bastion of calm in the storm. Yet, as I watched, I began to perceive the truth of Holmes's observation. A subtle nod from Croft, barely perceptible amidst the chaos, sent one broker scurrying away. A slight flick of his finger, almost unseen, caused another to begin selling furiously. He was a puppeteer, and the frantic jobbers his marionettes, their strings pulled by gestures no one else seemed to see. For the better part of an hour we observed Croft orchestrate a delicate and brutal ballet of finance. At his unseen command, shares in the British South Africa Company would plummet as his agents flooded the market. Moments later, they would be bought up at a pittance by another of his associates. He was creating waves of artificial panic and confidence, shaking the company's value for reasons I could not yet fathom. It was only when we were rattling back towards Baker Street in the relative peace of a hansom cab that Holmes shed his disguise, straightening his back and rubbing the powder from his hair. The transformation was startling, the keen-eyed detective re-emerging from the shell of the doddering old man. "Good heavens, Holmes," I said, still reeling from the spectacle. "The man is a menace. He plays with fortunes as if they were trinkets," asked Dr. John Watson. "He is more than that, my dear fellow. He is a composer of chaos. What we witnessed was the deliberate creation of instability. By driving the share price down, he frightens away genuine investors and consolidates control for his own cabal. They mean to acquire a controlling interest before the concession vote, ensuring that, no matter the outcome, they will profit. Lord Ashworth's opposition was the final barrier to their scheme," stated Sherlock Holmes. His logic was, as always, impeccable and chilling. Back in the familiar quiet of our sitting-room, the roar of the exchange felt a world away. A fire crackled in the grate, its low hiss a soothing counterpoint to the memory of the market's clamour. Holmes moved not to his chemical table, but to the mantelpiece, where the charred fragments of the telegram lay carefully arranged upon a sheet of white paper. "We have seen the public machinations, the brute force of their conspiracy," he murmured, his eyes alight with a new focus. "But the orders, the true intent, must have been communicated privately. This, Watson, is the next lock we must pick. The whispers on the exchange were loud, but the message in the fire is silent, and, I suspect, far more deadly," declared Sherlock Holmes. The great city of London was hushed, muffled by a November fog that pressed its grey face against our window panes. Within the familiar chaos of our sitting-room at 221B Baker Street, however, there was no peace. The only sounds were the soft hiss of the gas lamp, the occasional crackle of the fire in the grate, and the intense, almost silent industry of my friend Sherlock Holmes. He was hunched over the centre table, a powerful lens in his hand, his hawk-like features illuminated in the warm glow. Before him, laid out upon a sheet of clean white paper, were the pitiful, charred remnants of the telegram we had recovered from Lord Ashworth's hearth. To me, they were little more than flakes of carbon. To Holmes, they were a sacred text. For over an hour he had worked with the intense stillness of a surgeon. The only sound was the faintest whisper of steel against carbon as he nudged the brittle fragments with the tip of a needle. I held my own breath, fearing a single misplaced sigh might reduce his painstaking work to dust. At last he straightened up, his back cracking faintly. "There, Watson, a phoenix from the ashes, though a rather tattered specimen. What do your medical eyes make of it?" stated Sherlock Holmes. I leaned forward to inspect his handiwork. He had managed to piece together a small blackened rectangle, perhaps an inch square. On its surface, a series of letters and numbers were just visible, penned in a curiously precise hand. I read the visible characters aloud. XPVT73. "It seems to be gibberish, Holmes, perhaps some stock market notation," responded Dr. John Watson. A thin smile played upon his lips. "Gibberish, Watson, is merely a language we have not yet learned to read. This is no common scrawl, it is a cipher," explained Sherlock Holmes. He tapped the fragment with his fingernail, a sharp, decisive sound in the quiet room. "And a rather clever one. Notice the letter frequency, or rather the lack of it. No E's, no T's in their usual profusion. This is not a simple substitution. It is something more," observed Sherlock Holmes. He began to pace before the fire, his hands clasped behind him, his mind clearly working at a furious pace. The rhythmic creak of the floorboards under his feet was the only outward sign of the mental storm within. He spoke as if thinking aloud, his voice a low, energetic murmur. "Consider the context. The message was sent to a man obsessed with finance. It was destroyed upon his death. The subject, therefore, must be the Rhodesian gold concession," observed Sherlock Holmes. He paused in his pacing, turning to face me, his eyes alight with the fire of pure reason. "The cipher's key must relate to it. A keyword cipher, Watson. One word repeated, which dictates the shift for each letter of the true message. Simple, yet devilishly effective, if the keyword is unknown." He snatched a pencil and a sheet of paper from his desk, and for the next half-hour the only sound was the furious scratching of lead against paper. He muttered words to himself, testing them like keys in a lock, Rhodesia, Ashworth, Concession, each one tried and discarded. I watched, fascinated, as rows of nonsensical letters appeared and were crossed out with impatient strokes. Then he stopped. He stared at the paper, a strange light dawning in his grey eyes. His voice was sharp now, filled with the thrill of the chase. "The stock, Watson, the company itself. The British South Africa Company is colloquially known on the exchange by a more poetic name, derived from its crest. They call it the Phoenix," deduced Sherlock Holmes. His pencil flew once more with a new and certain energy. He wrote the word Phoenix over and over above the letters from the telegram fragment. A moment later, he threw the pencil down with a cry of triumph. "We have it, or a piece of it. Listen to this. The first letters decrypt to SEL. The numbers 7 and 3 must refer to a price, 7 and 3 shillings. And this last part, VOTEDA. Sell at 7 and 3 on the day of the vote. A clear instruction for market manipulation," Sherlock Holmes pointed out. "Good heavens, Holmes, it is proof of the conspiracy you suspected?" Dr. John Watson inquired. He was not listening. His eyes were fixed on the last, most heavily charred fragment which he had set aside. "But there is more. Something was to happen after the sale. A meeting, perhaps. This last part is almost lost," observed Sherlock Holmes. He held the fragment so close to the gas lamp that I feared it would ignite anew. He peered at it through his lens, his breath held in a silent vigil. A clock chimed the late hour somewhere in the sleeping house, a mournful, metallic sound. He looked up, his face grim but alight with certainty. "St. James. The message ends with the letters S, T, and what can only be part of a J. St. James's Park, Watson, the source of that peculiar red soil on Croft's boot." He strode to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain, peering out into the swirling fog, as if he could see all the way to the Royal Park. When he turned back, his expression was one of formidable resolve. "Our conspirators have a rendezvous. The message confirms the place, if not the time. Fetch your service revolver and a thick coat, my dear fellow. We have a vigil to keep," remarked Sherlock Holmes. The chill of a late autumn evening had settled over London, and a damp, cloying mist crept from the Thames to swathe the city in a blanket of grey. This very mist served as our cloak as we lay concealed behind a thicket of rhododendrons in St. James's Park. The gas lamps, haloed and indistinct, cast long, wavering shadows upon the gravel paths. A profound quiet had fallen, broken only by the mournful call of a water-bird from the lake and the distant, muffled clang of a clock-tower striking the hour. "Are you quite certain of this location, Holmes? It seems a most unlikely spot for the clandestine dealings of a man like Silas Croft," Dr. John Watson replied. I spoke in a whisper, my breath pluming in the cold air. Holmes, crouched beside me, was a study in absolute stillness, his sharp features barely visible in the gloom. His reply came as a low, impatient murmur, his gaze fixed intently on the path ahead. "Certainty is a luxury, Watson, but probability is a science. The peculiar red marl I recovered from Mr. Croft's boot heel is found in quantity in only 3 places within a 2-mile radius of his club. 2 are private gardens, inaccessible at night. The 3rd is this very path, resurfaced a fortnight ago with soil from the Weald. It is here he walked. "It is here he will return," deduced Sherlock Holmes. As he spoke, the distinct crunch of footsteps on the gravel path reached our ears. They were slow, deliberate, and grew steadily nearer. Peering through a gap in the leaves, I saw the stout, familiar figure of Silas Croft emerge from the fog. He paced back and forth, glancing at his pocket-watch under the faint glow of a nearby lamp. He was not kept waiting long. A second set of footsteps, heavier and more resolute, announced another's arrival. A man of formidable height and military bearing materialized from the mist. He was wrapped in a heavy travelling cloak, his face obscured by shadow and a downturned brim. The two men met without a handshake, their voices low and urgent, carried to us in broken fragments on the damp air. "The vote is tomorrow. There can be no complications. Ashworth's affair has settled the matter, as you promised," replied Mr. Silas Croft. "My promises are kept. The concession will pass. You have the final payment?" Colonel Sebastian Moran replied. His voice was a deep, menacing rasp that seemed to cut through the fog itself. Croft passed a thick envelope to the tall man, who secreted it within his cloak without a glance. For a moment the stranger turned his head, and the gaslight fell fully upon his face. I saw a high, balding forehead, a sunburnt complexion, and a thin, cruel line of a mouth half hidden by a grizzled moustache. But it was the cold, predatory stillness in his eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. Beside me, I heard Holmes draw in his breath with a sharp, almost inaudible hiss. I had seen him face danger and death without a flicker of emotion, but now, in the murky confines of the park, I felt him grow rigid. His focus on the tall man so absolute it was unnerving. "Good heavens, Holmes, who is that man? Do you know him?" Dr. John Watson inquired. The two figures parted, melting back into the fog as silently as they had appeared. Holmes did not move for a long moment. When at last he spoke, his voice was low, devoid of its usual energy, and carried a gravity I had not heard in years. "Know him, Watson? I know him as the hunter knows the tiger. That is Colonel Sebastian Moran, once of Her Majesty's Indian Army, the finest heavy-game shot that our Eastern Empire has ever produced, and the second most dangerous man in London," deduced Sherlock Holmes. The name spoken by Holmes hung in the foggy air of our Baker Street rooms long after we had returned from St. James's Park. Colonel Sebastian Moran. The name alone was enough to conjure a chill that had nothing to do with the damp November night. It spoke of air guns and villainy, of a malevolent intelligence second only to that of the late Professor Moriarty. I watched my friend, who had remained almost entirely silent since our return, his brow furrowed in concentration. The familiar scent of shag tobacco was absent, replaced by the sharp, acrid tang of his chemicals, which now dominated the air. He was hunched over the small table he had designated as his laboratory, a chaos of beakers and retorts that bubbled and hissed under the steady glare of a gas lamp. The only other sounds were the soft crackle of the fire in the grate and the distant mournful cry of a foghorn from the Thames. For an hour I sat, watching his hawk-like profile, observing the intense focus of a man who has cornered his prey and is merely examining its tracks for the final damning piece of evidence. Now, Watson, the curtain is about to rise on the final act. Pray, come closer, deduced Sherlock Holmes. I moved to his side. Upon a white porcelain dish lay the crumpled piece of telegram paper we had retrieved. It looked innocuous, a mere scrap, yet I knew that within its fibres lay the key to Lord Ashworth's death. Holmes held the pipette above it, a single dark drop of fluid clinging to its tip. "Every trade has its secrets, my dear fellow. The paper-maker, the ink-grinder, the printer, they each leave a signature as unique as a man's own hand. I have penned a small monograph on the subject. This particular paper, you see, is unusually fibrous. The ink contains a trace of gum arabic, common enough, but it is the combination that is of interest," deduced Sherlock Holmes. He allowed the drop to fall. It met the paper with an audible hiss, a sharp sound of chemical alchemy in the quiet room. I leaned forward, fascinated. For a moment nothing happened. Then, as if a ghost were tracing a message with unseen ink, a faint stain began to bloom. It was not merely a discoloration, but a transformation, a creeping, vivid line of startling cerulean blue that spread through the paper's fibres, revealing a truth that had been invisible moments before. "Good heavens, Holmes, what is the meaning of that?" Dr. John Watson commented. "It means, my dear Watson, that our conspiracy is even more far-reaching than I had dared to imagine. That blue is a reaction to a specific bleaching agent, one used to treat paper pulp derived from the Rhodesian acacia. It is a process exclusive to a single small printing press established less than 2 years ago by the British South Africa Company, a press located in Bulawayo," explained Sherlock Holmes. "The name of the colonial outpost, so far from this quiet London room, struck me with the force of a physical blow. The web was not merely spun across our city, its anchor lay thousands of miles away, in the very heart of the territory Lord Ashworth had fought to protect." "From Rhodesia itself?" Dr. John Watson commented. He nodded grimly, his triumphant mood giving way to a colder aspect as he picked up a sheet of paper from his desk, upon which he had scrawled a series of words. The cipher was a simple substitution, keyed to the company's public stock ledger. Once I knew its origin, the solution was trivial. "This is the instruction that was sent to Mr. Silas Croft," stated Sherlock Holmes. He held the paper out. In his neat, precise script, the message was laid bare, a brutal summary of greed and murder. His voice was flat and hard as he read the words aloud. "Ashworth silenced. Proceed with sale. Concession assured." Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the hiss of the gaslight. We now had it all, the motive, the method, and the masters. Holmes began to methodically clean his instruments, his movements swift and purposeful. The time for analysis was over. "There is one final thread to pull, Watson. Fetch your hat and a stout walking stick. We are about to pay a call upon a financier," Sherlock Holmes noted. Armed with the damning telegram, we made our way the following morning to the heart of the city, where the great arteries of commerce pulse with unrelenting vigour. Mr. Silas Croft's offices occupied a new and imposing stone edifice in Lombard Street, a testament to the formidable power of modern finance. Hushed reverence filled the halls. The only sounds were the discreet rustle of paper and the distant rhythmic ticking of a grand clock, which seemed to count out the seconds of men's fortunes. Mr. Croft received us in a study that exemplified sober opulence. Polished mahogany gleamed, and the air was thick with the scent of old leather and sealing wax. He was a man of middle years, with a placid, almost benevolent face, and eyes that held a calm, watchful intelligence. He gestured for us to be seated with an unhurried grace that spoke of a man entirely at ease with himself and his world. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson, to what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? I trust you are not here to consult me on the fluctuating price of colonial railway shares," said Mr. Silas Croft. Holmes leaned forward in his chair, his expression a mask of quiet intensity. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "We are here, Mr. Croft, to discuss the death of Lord Ashworth, a death which we have reason to believe was a murder you directed," replied Sherlock Holmes. I watched the financier's face for any flicker of shock or fear, but it remained utterly impassive. He merely raised an eyebrow as a faint, almost pitying smile touched his lips. He picked up a silver letter-opener from his desk, turning it over in his fingers as if examining a curious artifact. "My dear Mr. Holmes, your reputation for the fantastic is well earned, I see. Lord Ashworth's death was a tragedy, of course, a great loss to the Empire. But to suggest my involvement is, if you will forgive me, quite absurd," Mr. Silas Croft replied. "A telegram sent from Bulawayo instructed you to proceed with a sale once Ashworth was silenced. The concession, it said, was assured," Sherlock Holmes noted. For the first time, a shadow of something other than amusement crossed Croft's face. Not fear, but a flicker of genuine curiosity. He set the letter-opener down with a soft click against the wood. "You are remarkably well informed. But even if such a message existed, it would prove nothing. It is my business to act on information. As for the timing of this supposed murder, I am afraid your theory encounters an insurmountable obstacle," replied Mr. Silas Croft. He leaned back, placing the tips of his fingers together, the very picture of untouchable, almost insolent confidence. It was not the defiance of a cornered man, but the profound assurance of one who holds all the cards. On the evening of Lord Ashworth's death, I was not lurking in shadows or dispatching assassins. I was, in fact, delivering the keynote address at the annual Imperial Commerce Dinner at the Savoy. Some 200 gentlemen heard my speech on the economic prospects in Matabeleland, including at least 3 members of Her Majesty's Cabinet. The text was printed in the Times the very next morning. I can have my clerk fetch you a copy if you wish." Mr. Silas Croft replied. I felt a profound sinking in my stomach. The alibi stood before us, a fortress of granite built upon the testimony of the most powerful men in London. To challenge it would be to challenge the establishment itself. I glanced at Holmes, expecting to see a reflection of my own dismay, but his face was a mask of placid concentration. He rose slowly to his feet. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Croft. You have been most illuminating," deduced Sherlock Holmes. As we descended the stone steps back into the clamour of the street, the sound of the great office clock striking the hour seemed to mock our failure. I could not contain my disappointment. Holmes, the man is untouchable. His alibi is absolute. We have reached a dead end, commented Dr. John Watson.
Holmes hailed a passing hansom, and as the cab door clicked shut, enclosing us in its rattling private world, he turned to me. A familiar keen glint returned to his eyes, and the ghost of a smile played upon his lips. On the contrary, Watson, Mr. Croft has not built a fortress. He has, with his own words, handed us the very key to his undoing, Sherlock Holmes noted. The wheels of our hansom cab rattled a dismal rhythm upon the wet cobblestones as we departed from Mr. Silas Croft's imposing Mayfair residence. A thick yellow fog swirled about the gas lamps, muffling the sounds of the city and mirroring the confusion in my own mind. Croft's alibi seemed a fortress of granite, his confidence an unbreachable wall. I felt the chill of defeat settle upon me. It is no good, Holmes. The man was surrounded by members of Parliament. We have reached a dead end, responded Dr. John Watson. Holmes, who had been leaning back with his eyes closed, opened them to fix me with a familiar, sharp glint. The dim light of the passing lamps threw his hawk-like features into stark relief. On the contrary, Watson, we have merely been admiring the ornate facade. Now we must locate the tradesman's entrance. Croft's alibi is perfect, and that is precisely its flaw. It is too perfect, too public. It is the work of a man who plans not to avoid suspicion, but to arrogantly defy it, remarked Sherlock Holmes. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, intense pitch that commanded my full attention above the clatter and rumble of the street. You see, Croft is the architect of this affair, but he would never dirty his own hands. He is the spider at the centre of the web, but the killing was done by the wasp. For such work he required a man of singular ruthlessness, a man with no conscience and a steady hand. He required Colonel Sebastian Moran, remarked Sherlock Holmes. Moran, then he is the unseen hand in all this, commented Dr. John Watson. He is indeed. Croft, you see, provided the motive and the meticulously crafted opportunity. Lord Ashworth's opposition threatened to unravel the entire Rhodesian gold concession, costing Croft and his syndicate a fortune. They needed him silenced. Moran was the instrument of that silence, declared Sherlock Holmes. The cab swayed as it turned a corner, and I had to steady myself. Holmes, however, seemed utterly still, his mind's eye fixed upon the scene of the crime. Picture it, Watson. Moran gains entry to the study, not as a common burglar, but as a messenger. He is there to deliver a final ultimatum. He presents Lord Ashworth with the telegram from Rhodesia, the one whose fragment we recovered, as proof of their power, a brutal warning of what they could do to his reputation and interests, stated Sherlock Holmes. I could almost hear the crackle of the fire in Ashworth's study, so vivid was Holmes' description. But they misjudged their man. Lord Ashworth was a man of principle, however flawed. In a final, magnificent act of defiance, he must have snatched the damning message from the Colonel's hand and thrust it into the hearth. It was this, Watson, this unforeseen act of courage that sealed his fate. Moran, his ultimatum literally turned to ash, was provoked. The tiger struck. His voice was cold as steel. The blow was delivered with the butt of his revolver, the scene arranged to suggest a suicide. But in his haste to quit the house before the alarm was raised, Moran made his single fatal error.
He failed to ensure the telegram was entirely consumed by the flames, leaving behind the one piece of evidence that tells the entire tale, deduced Sherlock Holmes. Our cab drew to a halt with a final jolt before the familiar door of 221B Baker Street. The sound of my friend's key scraping in the lock a moment later was a welcome one. Inside, the warm glow from our sitting-room fire and the familiar, comfortable clutter offered a stark contrast to the grim narrative that had occupied our journey. Holmes moved immediately to his chemical table, his energy renewed. "But what is to be done, Holmes? Croft is untouchable, and Moran has surely fled the country by now." Dr. John Watson replied. Holmes did not turn. He picked up a telegraph form and began to write, his pen scratching swiftly across the paper. His reply, when it came, was filled with a quiet, chilling confidence. "A fortress is only as strong as its foundations, Watson. Mr. Croft has built his upon the silence of Colonel Moran and the strength of his own alibi. Tomorrow, with the help of our good friend Lestrade, we shall demonstrate to him just how fragile those foundations truly are," observed Sherlock Holmes. The private parlour Holmes had engaged at the Charing Cross Hotel boasted a heavy opulence that seemed to absorb all sound. Thick velvet curtains swallowed the ceaseless rumble of the Strand, and the peremptory tick of a gilded clock upon the mantelpiece sliced through the silence. It was a sound that seemed to measure out the final moments of a man's freedom. Inspector Lestrade, looking distinctly uncomfortable in such plush surroundings, stood sentinel by the window, a stout and unmoving figure against the grey London light. I myself felt a familiar nervous tension, a prelude to the final act of one of my friend's intricate dramas. "The trap is set, Watson. All that remains is for the quarry to enter. Ah, I believe I hear his footstep now," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. Holmes's voice, though low and calm, sliced through the quiet, holding a razor's edge of anticipation. A moment later, a deferential knock echoed at the door, and a hotel porter announced our guest. Mr. Silas Croft entered with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to commanding any room he occupied. He was impeccably dressed, his smile a mask of polite inquiry, though his eyes darted from Holmes to Lestrade and then to me, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. "Mr. Holmes, you requested this meeting on a matter of some urgency regarding the Ashworth estate, an unusual venue, if you will permit me to say," Mr. Silas Croft answered. "Privacy, Mr. Croft, is paramount. Pray be seated. We have a few items to discuss before Inspector Lestrade here requires your assistance," remarked Sherlock Holmes. Croft's smile tightened at the mention of the inspector's name, but he seated himself with studied nonchalance. Holmes moved to the table, his movements precise and deliberate, like a surgeon laying out his instruments. He placed a small charred scrap of paper upon the polished mahogany. "You may recognize this, a fragment of a telegram recovered from the grate in Lord Ashworth's study. When decoded, it reads, 'Concession fails, Lobengula refuses. Act now.' A rather direct instruction, would you not agree?" A muscle twitched in Croft's jaw. His voice, when it came, was strained. "It is gibberish. It could mean anything. answered Mr. Silas Croft. "On the contrary, it means everything, especially when our chemical analysis proves the paper stock and ink are identical to those used exclusively by the British South Africa Company's telegraph office in Bulawayo. A long way for a piece of gibberish to travel, is it not?" Sherlock Holmes noted. Holmes then produced a small glass vial containing a pinch of reddish-brown soil, setting it next to the telegram fragment. The financier stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "And then we have this. A peculiar Rhodesian soil, rich in iron oxides. A sample was found adhering to the carpet near the French windows of the study. An identical sample, I might add, was recovered from the boot heel of your associate, Colonel Sebastian Moran, an avid hunter and a man not known for his gentle persuasion." Croft shot to his feet, his face a mottled white. The smooth veneer had cracked, revealing the raw panic beneath. "This is preposterous, an outrage. You cannot connect me with that brute Moran," said Mr. Silas Croft. "Oh, but we can. A cabman has testified that he drove the colonel from his club to a rendezvous with you on the very afternoon of the murder. You hired the hand, Mr. Croft, that struck Lord Ashworth down. You orchestrated his death to secure your fortune in the gold concession," remarked Sherlock Holmes. A harsh, grating laugh erupted from Croft's throat, a sound utterly devoid of mirth. His bravado was a desperate final gamble. "You have nothing. The word of a cabman against mine? Moran will deny everything. You have no case," Mr. Silas Croft replied. Holmes leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes glinting like steel. He delivered the final, fatal blow, in a voice that was little more than a whisper. "I am afraid the Colonel will be denying nothing. We have it on good authority that he took passage on a steamer bound for South America 2 days ago. It appears, Mr. Croft, that he has left you to face the consequences alone," Sherlock Holmes observed sharply. The silence that followed was absolute, profound, broken only by the frantic, almost mocking tick of the gilded clock. Then the fight drained from Silas Croft's face, replaced by a look of utter, abject terror. The understanding crashed over him. He was not merely caught, but abandoned. He collapsed back into his chair, his body trembling, and covered his face with his hands. A low, wretched sob escaped him. "He promised. Moran promised me, swore it was foolproof. It was his idea to silence him. I only wanted to secure the company's future. Ashworth was a fool, an obstacle to progress," remarked Mr. Silas Croft. The confession tumbled out, a torrent of greed, ambition, and blame. Lestrade, who had watched the entire exchange with a grim satisfaction, advanced from the window. The quiet, metallic click of the handcuffs as Lestrade secured Croft's trembling wrists was the final, definitive sound in the fall of a city magnate. Our work here was done, but as Lestrade led the broken man away, I knew our duty was not yet complete. We still had to deliver the news, both bitter and just, to Miss Clara Ashworth. The drawing-room of Lady Beatrice Foxglove's Mayfair residence was an oasis of civility, far removed from the desperate confession we had extracted from Mr. Croft. A low fire whispered in the grate, its flames dancing on the silver tea service that sat untouched.
Outside, the afternoon fog descended, muffling the clip-clop of hooves to a distant, rhythmic beat. Miss Ashworth sat opposite us, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze fixed upon my friend with profound and anxious hope. Her voice was a gentle murmur, soothing the room's palpable tension. "We are most grateful you could come, Mr. Holmes. Clara has borne this burden with remarkable fortitude." Lady Beatrice Foxglove answered. Holmes inclined his head, but did not reply immediately. He stared for a long moment into the fire, his steepled fingers pressed against his lips, as if ordering the final pieces of this grim puzzle. Her question cut through the silence, her voice trembling slightly. "My father, Mr. Holmes. His name, his reputation," Miss Clara Ashworth answered. He turned his grey eyes upon her, their usual piercing quality softened with compassion. "Miss Ashworth, you may rest assured. Lord Ashworth was no suicide. He was a man murdered for his principles. We have the full confession of his business associate, Mr. Croft, who orchestrated the affair to silence your father's opposition to the Rhodesian Concession," Sherlock Holmes responded. A great shuddering sigh escaped her, and her rigid posture seemed to melt away. The relief on her features was painful to witness, for it spoke of weeks of silent agony. She closed her eyes, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. She opened them again, her resolve returning. "And the man who held the weapon?" Miss Clara Ashworth replied. His tone became clipped and precise once more. "He was a hired assassin, a brutish former colonel named Moran. Croft has given him up. Unfortunately, the man is as cunning as he is savage. By the time Lestrade's men reached his lodgings, he had fled the country. He will be pursued, but I hold little hope of his capture," observed Sherlock Holmes. A profound silence fell, broken only by the soft tick of a mantel clock. One villain was in custody, but the true murderer was free. Justice felt partial, unsatisfying. Her voice was now heavy with a weary resignation. "Then the concession, the vote in the company. It will proceed as they wished?" remarked Miss Clara Ashworth. "It will," he replied flatly. "And that, Miss Ashworth, is the crux of the matter. We have untangled a murder, a simple, almost vulgar crime when set against its motive. We can send a man like Croft to the Old Bailey, and hunt another like Moran across the globe. But we cannot place a stock portfolio in the dock. We cannot arrest the blind ambition of an enterprise," Sherlock Holmes noted. He rose and walked to the window, peering into the swirling grey mists swallowing London. His voice took on a distant, philosophical quality, as if he spoke more to himself than to us. "Your father died trying to halt a machine. We have merely exposed one of its broken cogs. The machine itself, this vast amoral engine of empire and finance, will grind on, heedless of the lives it consumes, whether they be in a Mayfair study or in the dust of Matabeleland. That is a crime for which there is no charge, and a court in which there is no judge." He turned back to the room, and for an instant I saw in his eyes not the thrill of the chase or the satisfaction of a solved puzzle, but a profound and chilling weariness. The case was closed, a life avenged, a name cleared. Yet, as the fog thickened outside, it seemed a greater darkness, one we could never hope to penetrate, had been left entirely untouched.